So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends in London, I would start with some recollections from the very past years when Arthur Fleischmann left Europe for South Africa in 1937. It severed the personal ties he had built up with his native town over 40 years. But 65 years later, the combined efforts of many individuals, and Julia Steinerová, who is helping me today very much, and I were among them at the time. So these efforts paid off, and his work was returned to its rightful place in a dedicated museum in Bratislava, presumably forever, since museums are meant to last. In fact, the museum was only open for 20 years. Today, I shall focus my attention on the 20 years of the interwar period, showing why Arthur Fleischmann's work belongs to Bratislava, and I will end with a plea to re-establish a permanent center of his work and legacy in the city. So the First World War brought political change to Central Europe and profoundly shaped cultural life too. Budapest and Vienna, as centers of the monarchy, were replaced by new national political centers, Prague and Bratislava. With the founding of the Czechoslovak Republic, Bratislava had, so to say, invent herself and started to develop her own cultural and artistic structures, which included the following. First of all, art institutions. The old Pressburger Kunstverein, established in 1885, was joined in 1920 by the Spolok Slovenských umelcov, founded by painter Julius Kern in the town of Martin, and in 1921 by the first Society of Artists, so-called Umelecká beseda Slovenska. 10 years later, with the aim of reintegrating Hungarian and German artists belonging in Czechoslovakia to minorities, the Society of Progressive Artists, SUM, was formed. Its name actually indicated much more their interest in Moderna than any national one. The first school of art and craft, we can see on this slide, a sort of Slovak Bauhaus, was founded in 1828, and the first monthly journal of art, architecture, and interior, under the title Forum, contained regular reports on art and exhibitions. Secondly, networks of creative individuals and artists began to appear, attracted by the new opportunities and creating a vibrant artistic life in Bratislava. This colorful array of individuals who had shared both the experience of life before and during the war, artistic schooling, brought their own slant, having studied in Vienna, Budapest, Prague, or even in Paris, Rome, or Munich. If we omit the painters, 3 Bratislava-born sculptors returned to the city. It were Robert Kühmeier, back from Vienna, Budapest, and Paris, Alois Riegele, who came back from Vienna and Rome, Josef Murman, who had studied both in Vienna under Professor Müllner in 1908, as Fleischmann did later, and last but not least, Arthur Fleischmann came back. So some of these artists studied alongside Fleischmann in Prague and Vienna, as they mentioned, to Murman and Kühmeier. Others were pupils of Jan Sturza, as Wojciech Ihriski and Ladislav Majerski. The others had taught at similar schools, as the School of Art and Crafts in Bratislava was sort of a younger counterpart of the Viennese Women's Academy of Fine and Applied Arts. Like Muhrmann, Fleischmann traveled between Vienna and Bratislava to visit his family, so they would naturally have come into contact with each other. Everything mentioned shows how deeply intertwined these artists were in their art and lives, and they may well have contributed to the organization of exhibitions and to other activities undertaken by artistic associations they belonged to. These sculptors were extremely versatile, working as sculptors, medallists, ceramicists, and turning their hand to decorative art, poster design, textile, which in turn fed into the modernist tendency of blurring or even erasing the line between fine and applied art. In tandem with this was a greater respect for materials, more precisely for exploring diverse materials, which would later become fundamental to Fleischmann's art over the 7 decades. In terms of style, they were no more eclectic or neoclassic as their teachers were, for instance, Josef Müllner in Vienna, but they laid the foundations of a new modern style as they sought to dominate the form, I quote, to dominate the form, to free it from the dictate of nature and follow their own inner life. The end of quotation. Unsurprisingly, their works exhibit similarities in expression. The fine facial features in the portraits of a young woman, next slide, please, by Arthur Fleischmann, the left side, compared to the portrait of Gyula Berec and Dagmar Rosulkova, who studied at Women's Academy in Vienna in 1931-32, and most probably came into contact with Fleischmann as well. Next slide, please. Here we see another type of stylization. On the left, again, Arthur Fleischmann, and we can compare it to Karl Peer and Robert Kuhmeier. But the most important professional links between Fleischmann and Bratislava were his membership in Pressburger Kulturverein, documented in 1919, and then between 1932 until 41, which most probably is not a correct information, and membership in SUM. And secondly, the exhibitions displaying his work, from the 16 of his sculptures on show at the first SUM exhibition at Umelecká beseda in November 31, to the final exhibition of his work at Pressburger Kulturverein on Kapitulská Street in December 1937. Let's have a look at Fleischmann through the eyes of art critics of that time. It is really impressive how profound the analysis of the time were, identifying both the various layers of Fleischmann's expertise, be it anatomical or material related, and his artistic approach, very typical elongated shapes, the light and shadow on glazed pieces, admiring at the same time the expressive nature of his works. The newspaper Hirado published an extensive review in November 31, where the author Karol Seredaj Gruber praised Arthur Fleischmann as, I quote, a prolific author whose ceramics were very much admired. This exhibition was so important and unique that the Bratislava Journal Forum, next slide, had announced it in several previous issue numbers, and the cover of issue 10 from 1931 featured a reproduction of Arthur Fleischmann's Apostle. The reviews and a separate article heaped praise on Fleischmann's work and especially, I quote, his productivity and promising future as an internationally renowned artist. Dr. Fleischmann's colored glazed ceramics of James, John, Andrew, and Paul are suggestive of Gothic art. Its prolonged composition, however, is a clear evidence of Fleischmann's stylistic ability. Next slide. The transcendence of anatomy is compensated for its inadequacy by means of unifying decorative impression. This is the catalogue of this exhibition of SUM, where the 16 works are enlisted. Two works in particular were praised, and it was the woman's head, both for its form and the way it played with light and shadow, and his perfectly executed marble torso. Another reviewer, Antal Sándor, thought of Fleischmann's ceramic pieces as constituting a completely new level. He also was excited by the small bust, I quote, a noble art value on its own, which for its inner quality is a convincing proof of his talent. A year later, Austrian Franz Tautig, in his article on the works of Arthur Fleischmann, described him as one of Müllner's most distinguished pupils, a sculptor who perfectly understood the mission of contemporary sculpture, and he took the consequence for the importance of color. He naturally understands the external, the outward effect of art, yet the heads radiate the spirit. Tautig therefore concludes that it would be not accurate to refer to Fleischmann as a ceramicist, since ceramics are merely a means of achieving his aim. Spatial art is the primary concern of this sculptor. In 1936, Kalman Brodiani, in his summarizing article in Forum, cannot but enthusiastically repeat the evaluation of outstanding qualities of Arthur Fleischmann as an extremely well-prepared sculptor. I suppose that Dr. Holchig already mentioned, but we could not understand him properly, that the City Museum purchased Fleischmann works, the Apostles John and Andrew, already after this exhibition, acquiring more and more over the years, so that by the time of the exhibition of 1996 in Bratislava and in Vienna, there were around 20 items by Fleischmann in the various collections in Bratislava. His work from his Vienna studio was transferred to his mother in Bratislava too. The invitation to the SUM meeting of April 27, 1938, to discuss its future, did not reach Fleischmann as it did not reach several others. As a result, the attendance was poor. There was no future for the art institutions established after the First World War, and the next war itself meant no future for many artists in Bratislava. Arthur Fleischmann was not the only one to leave the town. Murman and Kühmeier departed too, to sink into oblivion. In the 1960s, Slovak art historians lacked information about Fleischmann's life and art and simply saw him as a ceramist who lived in Johannesburg, a conclusion apparently drawn based on his sculptures in the Municipal Museum depository. Consequently, the art historian Marianna sees in Fleischmann works, I quote, the influence of post-Rodinian style. He inclines towards monumental, yet laconic expression. The chinks of light that appeared in the Iron Curtain in 1968 failed to cast a new light on Arthur Fleischmann, and even the Slovak Biographical Dictionary from 1986 contained no more information than Város' earlier book 25 years ago. It was not until 1996 that there was a real possibility of his artwork being shown for the first time in Bratislava and in Vienna, and of a museum being opened at Biela Street. These would display a dozen or so of his artwork that were stored in the depositories at the Municipal Museum, Slovak National Gallery, and Historical Museum at the castle, as well as numerous pieces loaned by Joy and Dominic from London. Miss Zuzana Franzova had the privilege of being appointed curator of the collection and thus has become a pioneer and expert on Arthur Fleischmann in Slovakia. Arthur Fleischmann's family generously added further items to the museum collection, and the museum itself set about systematically building up its collection too. Between 2003 and 2015, the collection grew to include additional 21 pieces, and another 35 pieces came by 2019, all from Johannesburg and London. So the Municipal Museum and its curator were by merit proud of its, I quote, dignified art showcase that can certainly compete with those abroad, end of quotation. Sadly, though, that this very positive, very promising commitment was stopped and did not continue. So my paper arguing for Arthur Fleischmann's place in Bratislava, where in the first part of his artistic career, he was one of the city's most important sculptors, cannot but end with a plea to preserve the unique, valuable heritage of this internationally renowned artist for Bratislava and its visitors. Thank you very much.